Okay, I'm going to talk about COVID a little bit and how the ruling class gained control over the working class. Okay, so obviously they gained financial control, right? And this comes through the rising wealth inequality. We know that the bottom 90%, we know that a lot of wealth was transferred from the bottom 90% to the top 10 or top 1%. We have statistics on this, okay? And so the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, right? And the reason this happens is because, the supply chains get disrupted, so the supply drops and the demand stays roughly the same. So the prices for that supply rise. So every company that's taking raw materials, purchasing raw materials, and turning them into goods and services, they have to raise their prices in order to keep profits high, right? So the owners raise the prices to maintain their profits. Meanwhile, the end consumers have to pay for those higher profits. They have to pay for those higher prices. So if you are an employee and your wage stagnated, which many wages stagnated, then the end result is that you, in effect, you get poorer as an employee if you're not an owner, if you don't own stock or you don't own a company directly, right? And if you are, or maybe you just got laid off and you you don't have a job at all now. Either way, you're still paying for those higher prices. So there's the other way that these prices rose was in response to these stimulus bills. So we print money without value creation, and then that money ends up, or rather the lack of value creation, it causes inflation. Okay, we know this is basic economics, and that inflation gets passed on to consumers while the owners profit, right? The owners will not let their profits diminish, so they just raise the prices. And if you look at any one market, say you look at the food industry, all of the companies are going to raise their prices because the prices of the raw materials went up. So it's not so much that the companies within these markets are colluding, but it's more that it benefits everyone to raise their prices, so they do it together. They do it in conjunction with one another without even necessarily talking to each other, right? So it's not price collusion. It's just the way capitalism works. So again, if you're a working class citizen and you don't own stock, you don't own a company, you are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. Okay, this is how capitalism works when the employees do not own the means to production. So all that aside, obviously, in response to COVID, the rich got richer. Okay, we know this. But how did they gain control? If not necessarily financial control, how did the ruling class gain control over the middle class, the working class? Well, they did this by basically controlling perception, okay, public perception. And what do I mean by that? Well, in mainstream media, the right-wing media pushed the anti-vax narrative, and the left-wing media pushed the pro-vax narrative. And what this does is it creates a divide between the left and right, right? It creates this, it creates this anti-vax versus pro-vax divide. Now that divide was there before COVID, but it's obviously gotten a lot worse since then, okay? And what this divide does is it causes the pro-vax people to blame the anti-vax people for the stress, for the economic stress. So now the people who again, the pro-vax people, they blame the people who don't get vaccines for, causing the supply chain disruptions, because now maybe people are so sick that they can't work. So the supply chains get disrupted, and ultimately the owners profit from that. The wages stagnate. So the pro-vax people blame the anti-vax people for their economic stress. And the same happens in reverse. So now the anti-vax people blame the pro-vax people for, in effect, we could say that maybe the anti-vax people blame the government for paying Big Pharma, giving their tax dollars to Big Pharma to pay for these vaccines, right? The bottom line is that the working class is blaming each other for their economic stress and for their problems. Meanwhile, the ruling class, the 1%, is getting richer. And again, this is how the ruling class gains control over the public. They divide them amongst each other. Okay, it's a typical divide and conquer strategy. They divide them along this vaccine divide, right? Pro-vax versus anti-vax, and the end result is they spend less time focusing on the class divide, which is the divide that actually causes their stress, right? And this is the basis of every divide and conquer strategy that's ever been used. And so obviously the wealthy class got richer, but that's not really even the thing that they cared about the most. Okay, the ruling class and the mainstream media, like, the biggest benefit that they got from COVID was the fact that they now have another divide in their pocket to rip out at any time they want to distract the public, and in effect to make the wealth inequality worse whenever they want. It wasn't the money that the government paid to big pharma, or that the owners siphoned from the working class during COVID, that benefits the ruling class the most. The biggest benefit they got was this divide that they've fostered between the anti-vax and pro-vax people. It has made the divide, and in conjunction with that, these anti-vax and pro-vax divides, these narratives, they've been attached to the Republican and Democrat Party. So now you have these anti-vax and pro-vax narratives, they are attached to the political parties. And so next election, we're going to talk about vaccines during the debates probably, and it's going to cause more people to vote for Democrats and Republicans who are ultimately not doing anything to fix the economic issues. So now, again, we take one more election and throw it away to a Democrat, an establishment Democrat or Republican, and the end result is the economic issues get worse, the wealth inequality rises, and all because we allowed the mainstream media to divide us along this anti-vax and pro-vax divide. So the solution to this problem is to shut your mouth, okay? If somebody doesn't want to get a vaccine, you just let them do what they want. If somebody wants to get 7 boosters, have a booster every 2 weeks, let them do what they want. And the end result is that we won't be so busy fighting over this divide, and we'll focus more on the class divide. And maybe we'll be able to vote for somebody who actually represents the interests of the public, of the working class. So maybe we'll vote for somebody that actually wants to attack the wealth inequality that is causing all of the stress. Okay, so I can't emphasize this enough. You can't fall for these divide and conquer strategies. Otherwise, we, as a working class, will just keep conceding more and more control to the government and to the owners in this country, and we will fall into an authoritarian hellscape. That is how authoritarianism works. They divide the public amongst themselves, and then they just take more and more control, just a little bit at a time. It's not even necessarily a slippery slope. It could be a steady incline slope, but it's not necessarily going to increase the rate necessarily. It could, but it is a slope. Okay, the authoritarianism is increasing, and it's both political parties that are pushing these authoritarian policies. So again, don't let disasters, don't let a virus, don't let anything divide you among your working class citizens. The worst thing for the corporations, the owners, and the government who they lobby and who they're in bed with, the worst thing for them is a working class that's working together. They don't want labor strikes. They don't want unions, because it takes the profits from them. It takes their profits. And what it does is it returns the value creation back to the people who created the actual value. There is no billionaire who has ever earned those billions. And if you're going to argue there is, then I can't really help you. You have to think about this logically. Because the thing is everyone in an economy is necessary. If you are at a McDonald's and you have a supply line, every single person in that line is necessary. Just because their labor is abundant, just because they don't have a skilled Just because they're not a skilled laborer doesn't mean that they're not necessary. You take anyone out of that supply line and the whole thing collapses. It's literally a chain. It's like if you take one link out of the chain, it's no longer a chain. It no longer functions. And if we pretend that some chain links are more important than others, then we're not thinking about it logically. It's really simple to see this if you think about it. For any longer than you probably have been trained to, that you've just been, if you believe that a skilled laborer is more valuable because their labor is scarce, it's because you've been told that your whole life, and you've reinforced it with your behaviors. It's not because it actually makes any logical sense. So you have to understand that the ruling class will do anything to divide and conquer you. And if you fall victim to these divide and conquer strategies, you're going to lose control of your own life through authoritarian policies. So just give that a little thought. Thanks for watching.